just going to break into that now, and we're going to cross live to the UN, where ambassadors from Arab nations are holding a joint news conference about the situation in Gaza. We're going to listen to that in just a moment. Reminder that about 18,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October. Let's listen in now.
IC group and Arab group presented the resolution through United Arab Emirates, and this resolution got 13 votes and has been voted against by United States. We decided to request the reception of the 10th emergency special session in General Assembly, and we meet today the President of General Assembly, and it has decided that this session will resume this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and we are here to give you some information about the latest ongoing situation in Palestine, and what we are going to do in this special emergency session. And I give the floor right now to Ambassador Riyadh in order to give you more detail on the situation.
Thank you very much, Brother Sidi Mohammed, the chair of the OIC. As we told you last week, we will keep you informed and we will keep meeting with you, and we are doing that. After last Friday, when we had an unprecedented number of co-sponsors to the draft resolution from outside the Council, 103 countries, unfortunately, that draft was defeated by casting a veto, in spite of the fact that 13 voted in favor. Immediately after that, we had consultations among the groups co-sponsoring this effort, and decided to send a letter to the President of the General Assembly from the chair of the Arab group and the chair of the OIC, requesting the resumption of the 10th emergency session. And we are very grateful that the President of the General Assembly cooperated with us very quickly during the weekend and with his staff, and circulated, as you know, a letter to the membership of the United Nations during the weekend, indicating that he will be convening resuming the 10th emergency session Tuesday afternoon today. We also uploaded the draft resolution, which I am sure that you are now have seen it, and we are collecting co-sponsorship to that draft resolution, and then the number is very high. It could very easily, approach the 100, but more importantly is the countries that will vote in favor. So we are in full mobilization mode. We will have another emergency meeting for the OIC group, because all the Arab countries are members of the OIC. So it is a combined, meeting at 11 o'clock in order to strategize for full mobilization of having the largest number possible of countries voting in favor, and it looks promising. Our effort is to bring an immediate ceasefire, call it a humanitarian ceasefire, as the SG calls it, is okay. And in our resolution, the one in the Security Council which was defeated, and the one that is before the General Assembly for voting on it this afternoon, it also refers to the letter of the SG invoking Article 99, in which he asked, among other things, for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. There is almost a global consensus on that call. Some of us were able to see even a demonstration in front of the US mission with a huge sign calling for a ceasefire now. So this is where we are. We had a meeting this morning with the President of the General Assembly. It was a very productive meeting. We talked about the details of how the session will unfold. The voting on the draft resolution will start at the beginning, because we anticipate that there will be a long list of speakers. The subject is urgent. The fact that we are meeting on Tuesday after the veto on Friday, it indicates that the situation is dire and we need action, and we need it as quickly as possible. So therefore, we are not going to have a long debate and then vote at the end, which is customary. But now we are going to vote on the draft resolution at the beginning, and then to continue with the debate. And the President of the General Assembly informed us that when we have a spillover, it will be taken on Friday, when the General Assembly very appropriately will be commemorating and celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. So that the situation is a massive tragedy for human rights, particularly for children and women in the Gaza Strip. So the continuation of the debate during that appropriate time is very, very befitting. Now, as you probably know, there might be some amendments from those who are still insisting to politicize the subject, and they are not satisfied with everything else, including what the SG says and what Lazzarini and others say. They insist to try to politicize a humanitarian resolution We are determined that we will not allow such amendments to succeed. We will oppose them. We will defeat these amendments. We were hoping that no amendment to be introduced and to vote up and down on the draft resolution itself, which calls mainly for a humanitarian ceasefire. At the end of the day, we believe we will prevail with almost the entire international community in calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, as the Secretary General is calling for, as all UN agencies working on the humanitarian field are calling for, as the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, in which the President will be in the occupied Palestinian territory again, in the next few days, calling for. Let me just give also a small footnote. We are grateful for the effort of our brothers and sisters from United Arab Emirates, led by Her Excellency Lina Nusaybe, who came up with a brilliant idea, as I said before, and invited a large number of Security Council members. They visited Rafah and the Al Arish yesterday. They listened to briefings from Mr. Lazzarini and Mr. Tor Wensland, along with our Minister of Health and our Minister of Social Welfare and senior officials from the Palestinian and the Egyptian Red Crescent. I don't know if my brother Muhammad has some details to share about that visit, but we are waiting for the readout from Ambassador Lana Nusaybe, whom should be here, I think, in a day or two, along with her colleagues who made that trip to Rafah. That is a significant trip. That is a gesture that the great majority of members in the Security Council who voted in favor of the ceasefire made that trip. It's symbolic, but it is very important, and we appreciate that. If you have questions, you can ask them. Yes.
Thanks, Ambassador. When you had the last vote in the General Assembly in October, there were 14 countries that opposed the humanitarian truce and 44 that abstained. Do you think, seeing how the situation has deteriorated in these weeks since the last vote, that you will bring some of those, persuade them to change their position to vote for the humanitarian ceasefire? And what will a large number say to the international community, a large number of support? And do you think it will send a message to Washington?
I think it will send a message to Washington and to others. You forgot to mention the most important number, which is the 121, actually 122, that were supportive of that draft resolution. Our expectation that this time it will be higher than that number, and we hope that it will be higher by a significant number. But we don't want to go ahead of ourselves. Let's wait and see how the General Assembly would react. Let me also add, if you compare the draft resolution before the General Assembly in comparison to the one on 26th of October, the resolution that you referred to, number one, in this resolution, it calls for a ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, while the other one, it talks about steps that lead eventually to a cessation of hostilities. So that is a significant difference. The other one, so that if some of you to ask me the question, is it binding or not binding? The language that is in it, it demands a ceasefire. And that is the language that was used in the Security Council, demanding from anybody from the United Nations, whether the General Assembly or the Security Council, it is much more powerful than calling for, and therefore it should be looked at as binding in that sense. Definitely, if the great majority of the General Assembly demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, there is no explanation to that sentence or that provision other than it is binding, and Israel has to abide by it. And those who are shielding and protecting Israel until now should also look at it this way and therefore act accordingly.
Ambassador, one of the amendments addresses the issue of detainees or hostages, but in the same time we see that Israel has detained a lot of Palestinians during this operation in Gaza and also in the West Bank. So why don't you also add a language that addresses this issue, because a lot of Palestinians have been detained?
There are many other very important elements that could be added to any resolution, but we will not lose focus from the most important issue, which is demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire now. That is the most important issue. If we are derailed from that objective and start trying to amend in this direction and that direction and politicizing the draft resolution, then we will not reach an agreement. The Security Council is a good example. The Security Council tried several times to agree on a language, but because of the politicization, they did not succeed. The only time they succeeded on 27/12, when they made it completely humanitarian resolution, they succeeded. So for those who want to learn from the behavior in the Security Council and in the international community, common sense would say, avoid controversial issues, avoid naming names, and concentrate on the demand of stopping this war, stopping this carnage, saving lives, saving the lives of our children in the Gaza Strip. and the women and the civilians and the vulnerables. These are the most important elements. Everything else, we could deal with it later on, but that's not the time to deal with it. We need to stop this war, and we need to stop it now, as the Secretary General indicated, so that UN agencies can perform the noble duty of reaching everyone in the Gaza Strip and giving them humanitarian assistance to save lives. Those who were killed, may God, take care of them, and He will. But those who are still alive, it is our duty to save them and to keep them alive. So that's why we will not lose focus from the main subject, and all those who are trying to be clever or blunt in terms of derailing us from this objective will be defeated. Although we appeal to them not to play that game and let us vote on the draft resolution as is. The essence of it is immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The last question.
Thank you, Ambassador Al-Jazeera English. My question for you is, you've mentioned that the resolution holds stronger language and you're hoping that this will put more pressure on Washington to lead to what will be a stop to the fighting. What is your message to the Palestinian people who worry that, similar to previous resolutions, Israel might ignore the resolution currently at the GA today?
The Palestinian people are so angry and frustrated, and no one should blame them. And if they are upset and angry with all of us and the UN and the international system, no one should blame them. They are right in that outrage and anger. When you have, now we are approaching 20,000 Palestinians killed, 70% of them children and women, and not counting those who are under the rubbles, and more than 50,000 injured, and 2/3 of the buildings in the Gaza Strip destroyed and cannot be used for living in such facilities. And all the hospitals are almost cannot function. They're out of work. And also that people do not have food, they do not have water, they don't have medicine. We have so many relatives, we call them and we ask about X or Y and Z, and they say they died, and we say why? Were they killed from bombardment? Some were killed by bombardment, others, they are dying because of lack of medicine, and so on and so forth. The tragedy is so beyond comprehension, so that if they are angry and frustrated, and they curse all of us, beginning with me, I understand, and they are right and we are wrong. Our duty is to try to save the lives who are still alive by having this resolution adopted and by forcing Israel to comply with it, and those who are shielding Israel to comply with the global consensus calling for a ceasefire. شكرا جزيلا. ما حدا سأل سؤال عربي.
Ambassador Riyad Mansour, the permanent observer of Palestine to the UN, he said, quote, "Our effort is to bring an immediate ceasefire. The situation is dire." Well, Kristen Sweeney joins us live now from the UN. Kristen, what can we make of that address?
Well, this is Ambassador Riyad Mansour of the Palestinian Authority attempting to rally support for a resolution that will be put to a vote before the General Assembly later today, a resolution very similar to one that was vetoed in the Security Council by the United States. He said that he is in full mobilization mode, and he was appearing there with Arab ambassadors and ambassadors from Islamic countries as well, who've called for this vote in order to build up pressure for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, noting that it's what the Secretary General of the United Nations has called for, noting that the humanitarian situation, humanitarian deliveries are not able to keep up with the growing demands of the people in Gaza who are suffering from a lack of food and medicine. This is the attempt to show Israel and the United States that there is global support for this humanitarian ceasefire, and they're hoping to get more than the 103 co-sponsors that they already had for the Security Council resolution in the General Assembly, saying that they were optimistic that a vast majority of countries would sign on. It would take 2/3 majority for the resolution to pass. And I should say that there are some amendments being proposed, one by the United States, which complained about the Security Council resolution, that it didn't specifically condemn Hamas for the attacks of October 7th, some language to that effect being proposed by the United States as an amendment. That will be voted on before the full vote in the General Assembly later today. However, the ambassador saying that the most important thing was to keep it simple, to focus on the need for a ceasefire and get as many countries on board as soon as possible.
Kristen Sweeney, thanks very much indeed for that.